benchmarks for understanding the unfamiliar aspects of the radically different science fiction universe in terms of the familiar. A benchmark is a standard by which concepts can be compared. Here we have benchmarks for value and cost, size, and range. Benchmarks for value and cost include salaries and wages, costs of living, investment and speculation returns, as well as rational constraints on accumulating fortunes. With wealth comes responsibilities. Primary among them is an all-consuming obsession. Such extreme wealth is incompatible with the central tenets of Traveller. Within Traveller, the primary purpose of wealth is to support continuing adventures and travel. Well, that's certainly a narrative constraint, although mechanically, I don't know how that could be considered. Here we have the simplification of capital investments in safe ventures, the Starship investment, a crucial component, I think, is financing, after a down payment of 20%, the price of a starship, after which the shipyard will begin construction of a vessel. So that's quite promising. Cash purchase, financed purchase, construction of a new 100 megacredit ship requires an investment by the shipyard of 60 megacredits, half in hardware, half in labor. Buyer makes a down payment, and then 480 monthly payments of 333,000 credits, which represents an interest rate of about 4%. Here's a very brief line which summarizes what could be the gross majority of a player's broad strategy, that trading is the business plan for the new owner. Typically, to operate the ship at a profit, carrying passengers, freight, and speculative cargo. So I think there's definitely a lot of intrigue around the trading of speculative cargo in particular. There may be government subsidies, and one must keep an account if one is to avoid financial mistakes. The ship owner is responsible for maintaining the ship's account, a running total of all income the ship receives minus all costs the ship incurs. And here is a table outlining an example ship on a lucrative route. Speculation can be sold. Let's see. Acquired goods can be sold at a short term for profit. Shopkeepers add their labor and expertise to a modest investment in goods. Rarely does a shopkeeper get rich. Being a shopkeeper is not the focus of most traveler characters. Speculator buys goods in the expectation that they can be sold at a profit later, typically on another world. So that's the basis of many a traveler adventure, I would think, or perhaps the keystone. Here are 3 examples of terrain in the Landgrant Speculation. Resources, it seems to have some heavy machinery, a factory of some kind, an estate, or a mine. Land has no value unless it can be exploited. A land grant confers rights over economic control, outright ownership, a title reflecting possession of the land, the territory itself, and the title. Independent of any noble titles. For example, Lord of the South Coast, Lady of the Pantel, or the incomparable Dame Hurst of the North Steppe. Subordinate additional territory grants. Or subordinate additional territory grants. For each terrain hex granted on the main world in a system, the holder is awarded a terrain hex on another world in the system. For example, the holder may have an undeveloped terrain hex on a rad world within the system. Now, this is something I'm curious about. What is a rad world versus a main world? I've seen those in the previous chapters, but I'll be curious to know what generally that system constrains or pertains to. Cost is the money required to produce. Price is the money required to buy. Value lies somewhere in between. A profitable crew is a sustainable crew, among other factors. How big is it really? Object size. Size evaluation. A tablet is 25 centimeters in length. It is approximately size 3. Or a range of medium and a distance of, and what is this? Can be seen at a distance of 150 meters. Size. Understanding size, you see a person-size object. Size indicates the approximate size or dimensions of an object. The chart shows the basic benchmark sizes. For example, the referee may say, you see a person-size object, person-size something in the distance, or a size 5 object in the starport tarmac. size 5 is, that's right, a person 5. Sensors detect a size 5 object separating from that ship. Needle reading. Word. Talking. R and T. What is this table? RT 0, RT 1, 2, 3, etc. Decimal size. Person size may indicate anything larger than a suitcase and smaller than a truck. Suitcase size may indicate anything larger than a book and smaller than a person. Is a suitcase a standard unit of measurement? Here we have a table with length and a vary or variance, perhaps, by size range. From a length of 1 or 150 meters. I could not tell you when or how to use the decimal size chart at this juncture. Costs. Here are some benchmarks for helping us understand the economic scale of various professions. Let's see, we have salaries, land grants, and wages. The monthly salary of a good entertainer is 500x. A base of fame 10 to 16. Spectacular, ordinary, good. Entertainer, ordinary, fame 1 through 9. Entertainer, ordinary, fame 10 through 16. Entertainer, ordinary, 17 plus. Those ordinaries get a 250x. When very famous, 125x. When of medium fame, or 25x. When relatively unknown. Codifying the importance of fame and the relative importance of talent. Or salaries in credits. Is that what X means? Credits? Base of rank or term. Term is a concept we've not yet covered, but will come up in character creation, meaning a unit of time, roughly 4 years, at which a person has been working on a career, such as functionary or scout, whose term is the base multiplier of their salary. Housing and meals provided at no cost for scout, merchant, spacer, soldier, and marines. What is a spacer? the worth of things. An object has a value to an individual based on a variety of factors. Cost refers to production, price refers to sales, and value is relative. These would be the rules for determining the profitability of a run to carry goods, or perhaps to offload goods found in a more adventurous capacity. But here we have a couple of descriptions on cost modifiers. Experimental products may be more costly. Advanced products as well. Your standard product is normal or ordinary. Your generic product is low quality control. I remember reading the rules for flux, but I do not remember them. It's a type of roll to make between -5 and 6, where we can subtract the light from the dark. But then how would we get 6, or ultimate, or many new features? Perhaps only with an additional modifier of some kind. Value rules: snack, meal, clothes, device, major part, ATV, large vehicle, small craft, starship. A manufacturer can usually make these goods, paying less than value. A buyer can usually buy these goods for value or slightly more. Clothes cost 100 credits. A device costs 1,000 credits. Major parts may cost 10,000. A starship is approximately 100 mega credits. This is a crucial table to consider and keep track of and understand for a referee. Page 45, the value benchmark. Base value is a very rough indication of the worth of an object. A good meal is worth about 10 credits, or CR10. A cook could pay a grocery cost of CR5, prepare a meal, and price it at CR10. Cost modifications. The cost, manufacturing cost, production cost, wholesale cost, is some fraction of the base value, taking into account volume production, production difficulty, resource availability, and available technology. These are price modifications. These are cost modifiers. Are those cost modifications? Volume production. An enterprise can manufacture a quantity of objects at a cost less than their final value. A business who is very efficient at production cost can divide the A business who is very efficient at production can produce an item at a cost that is 1/10 of the value to consumers. An individual assembler who produces 20 items at a time, it may cost them only 1/2 the value. Or rather, it may cost them an entire half of the value they could expect to get. Price modifications can be used in two different ways. Ordinary objects roll for demand only. Roll for demand only. So, for example, subtracting white from black, we would get a -3, very common item. With low demand and a price modifier of 70% of the standard cost. So your travelers might blindly purchase a crate of goods and discover that those clothes are in quite low demand. And therefore, was it very common? That was the supply. Well, I suppose that they are. Not necessarily complementary, these two. There is some notion that as demand rises, or rather as supply rises, demand goes down, but then again it's not necessarily perfect, and you might have a combination with a zero typical 1x times 0.7. Well, there you go. You would have a crate of clothes that were 0.7 times the typical value. You get 70 cents on the dollar. And that is the end of the section on benchmarks, beginning the section on characters, the central focus of Traveller. Now we've talked about a few things already. The habitable zones of planets, the various ranges, range bands and distances, standard units of volume, the narrative foundations and mechanical functioning of the game that this is ultimately. Not merely an encyclopedia, but a game. And what's it about? Characters. Every player plays a role. Human, non-human, robot, any gender, any career. And through that character, experiences the many adventures the universe of the far future has to offer. There are a set of sophonts baked in, or presumed, in the setting, as well as several variants of the human race who have evolved or developed in far reaches of the galaxy, or sorry, far reaches of that what we call charted space, which you may recall is that mere dot. And yet, there are tens of thousands of stars within it. Humaniform robots and strangeform robots, which are built for industry, synthetic persons grown in factories, genetic factories, and AI residing in ships' computers, and occasionally a disposable robot body, or, as in the protagonist of the novel Ancillary Justice, an AI residing in the occasional disposable synthetic persons or cybernetic captives. Every character has 6 basic digital values that describe their abilities, establishing a foundation for their interaction with the material universe. Now, Traveller describes 16 different characteristics, but every character has only 6. Typical human characteristics are strength, dexterity, endurance, intelligence, education, social standing, and possibly sanity or psi, PSI, as in psionics, an extrasensory mental power. Or perhaps, depending on the world, rather than one's social standing, one may consider instead their caste, their rank in a group hierarchy, or their charisma, one's capacity to navigate a small group hierarchy. And here I'll admit I'm not entirely sure when one would use one or the other. Here it says that agility is half dex, or that dexterity is half agility and half grace. In most cases, a character may use an associated physical characteristic at half value when H equals human characteristics. A is analog of non-human characteristics, so perhaps agility, grace, vigor rather than endurance, and instinct rather than intelligence, and caste rather than social standing are intended to be faculties of alien races or sophonts. The UPP is the Universal Personality Profile, a ready reference to the most fundamental information about a character. For example, AAA 777 or 444 CCC. What would that tell us? Well, if they're human, AAA 777 would suggest a strength, dexterity, and endurance of A, which is to say, is it 7 plus 1? Or is it 10? I have forgotten the expanded hexadecimal counting system that we're using here. One which I do believe we encountered. Was it not here? Elsewhere. Strange worlds, habitable zones, decimal orbits. I could have sworn that we were looking at the UPP earlier on in this text, probably before. Ah, that was it, wasn't it? It may not have been. It may not have been. E-hex, page 22. 19, 21, 22. The expanded hex code 0 through 9, A through Z, omitting I and O. Therefore, a AAA 777 player, character would have a strength, dexterity, and endurance of 10 and a C4, C5, and C6 of 7, where C4 is intelligence, and C5 might be education, training, or instinct. And that depends on some factor around which I've yet to wrap my head. Each characteristic has a name and may be identified in several distinct ways. Abbreviations, or ABB. For example, strength is STR, only the initial letter of the abbreviation. So you see, this is not just a role-playing game. It is also a style guide. Its own style guide. The genetic profile is a 6-letter string which shows the specific 6 characteristics for a sophont. For example, the human genetic profile, which I believe we saw genetic profile ultra abbreviations listed here. SDAGESVIETI. SCKSP. Oh, well. Luckily, although there are some repetitions, the meaning of letters in the genetic profile is position dependent. Position codes, Cs 1 through 6. A characteristic is also identified by its position in the UPP using the letter C characteristic followed by 1 through 6. To avoid confusion between a word's ordinary meaning and its use as a characteristic, such as capital S strength and little s strength, a character may be identified with the format position code equals characteristic name. For example, C5 equals training, or C5 equals education, C4 equals intelligence, or C3 equals vigor. Within position codes, characteristics are related and are rough equals. The human characteristic is the primary. There may be one or more analog characteristics. For example, dexterity is the human characteristic. For coordination, some sophonts instead have agility, which emphasizes overall body coordination, or grace, which emphasizes body-limb coordination. They are analogs of dexterity and substitute for each other at half value. A sophont with grace attempting a dexterity task would use half grace, almost always working at a disadvantage. And now I'm led to wonder, what makes a task dexterity? As a referee or game master in other systems, I look to my players' character sheets to determine what type of tasks are available. And this is a little bit backwards for me. The idea of having grace tasks at which all humans are disadvantaged certainly leads for narrative depth. Characteristics provide a simple mechanism: check characteristic, or check dexterity, check charisma, for resolving situations. Here's a handy little table. An easy check is 1d equal or less than their characteristic, or 2d equal or less than characteristic. I see. So here, the attempt is to roll under your characteristic. If I have a 7, if I am, for example, a character playing AAA 777, then every easy check I pass with flying colors, and a difficulty check, and a normal difficulty check, I have only a few opportunities to fail. Or, if we want to go further, I can form a difficult pool and still roll under my characteristic and succeed. If only one specific characteristic is appropriate, each successive use of the same characteristic rolls with mod -1 to avoid recurring use of an available high characteristic. A character cannot check characteristic until 2 other characteristics have been used. That is a fairly straightforward rule. One cannot continue to hammer away if one is attempting to, for example, use their strength to pry open a door. One cannot simply strain and strain and strain. Or rather, one cannot use game time to do that. A single check might represent many minutes of straining and straining to heave open a door. And therefore, to roll those dice again would not be in keeping with the narrative. And would not be a very fun game. For example, of easy checks and hard checks, Spacer Fenric Kane, 68A 999, is loading cargo on a free trader. One especially large container is blocking a floor access panel. He puts his shoulder to the load and tries to move it. Check strength. So the referee says, check strength. Spacer Fenric rolls 2D. In this example, he rolls a 7, which is greater than the strength of 6, that leading digit, and cannot use strength again immediately. The player then has to come up with a narrative alternative, such as rocking the container. Physical versus mental versus social versus obscure. These are the categories of characteristic. Physical, C1, 2, and 3. All characters have strength. There are 3 different characteristics for fine physical activity. Dexterity for humans, agility and grace. We've covered that. Mental characteristics, 4 and 5. All sophonts have intelligence. Sophonts. Social standing, charisma, caste, sanity, and psi. How many dice? Humans roll 2D. Using C1, the characteristic strength governs load and burden. Burden is the perceived load after all modifications. If burden does not exceed strength in kilograms, there is no penalty. Burden, also detailed in the Krebs system chapter, which this is the first we're hearing of that. May increase or decrease load, carrying capacities, transferring loads, lifting, dragging, dexterity, grace, used in balance, accuracy, throwing or weapon use. When a character risks losing their balance, check C2. Endurance or stamina. These are abstractions on the characteristics. These numbers, C's 4 and 5, education or training or instinct. Instinct function poorly in the education or training environment and cannot use those institutions. Finding basic facts, substituting education, instinctual reactions. A character with instinct confronted with a task that requires education or training reacts instinctively. For easy tasks, easy check instinct. For average tasks, check instinct. For difficult tasks, hard check instinct. That is a hard pool. For tasks beyond difficult, roll the number of dice for the task. I wonder what that means. What it is to roll the number of dice for a given task. Instinct provides a time advantage That's crucial. So if one is playing some kind of insect. Nobility confers a social standing. Charisma is an alternative that automatically defers to the leadership of others with higher charisma, or operates as half one's social standing. To challenge charisma, difficult, less than the characteristic. Opposed, 2, resolves the challenge in one task. Challenger selects characteristic. Losers reduce charisma by -1. If challenger is the winner, his charisma increases to opponent's former charisma. Fascinating. Thus modeling some kind of psychosocial antler bashing. Sanity is the ability to make reasonable sound use of the mental characteristics. Which allows different abilities.